So yeah, Styx has some new clothes. That's nice. He's not wearing the red robe, but he's not wearing that jacket. It looks like it's just a long sleeve black shirt. Not bad. So Styx has a new video. A Patriot Party is a good idea. We've seen previous Styx videos where he kind of goes out and says, hey, should we split from the Republican Party? And I love it. I love it so much. Please, Styx, take you and all your fashy buddies and go start a different party. You can have a lion be the animal that it's associated with instead of like a donkey or an elephant. You go do that. I'm sure that'll work out very well for the right in this country.
All right, everyone, the uprising against neocon, neolib politics continues, and
The uprising. We're shitposting on Parler, okay? That's a revolution.
forefront of that is the concept of a patriot party, an America First-ism that congeals into an actual mainline political movement as opposed to being just a proportion of the current political landscape. And I've come to the conclusion that it's probably the best thing for the United States. It's probably for the best that the GOP in its current form dies, is replaced then by, a movement that actually embraces the values the GOP has pretended to fight for the last 50 years.
Party split. Party split.
It pretended to fight for the working and middle class, average workers, business, the ability of capitalism, conservatism in some cases in the moral sense. I digress from particularly liking that. Free speech, constitutional strict constructionism, free trade, things of that nature, but also fair trade in the sense of not getting abused by other countries, and largely was less interventionist initially.
You can't really have free trade while also advocating for policies that would be protectionist, which is basically what he just said. He basically just said, I want to be both protectionist and have free trade. Those are antithetical. Like, if you put tariffs on incoming goods, that's the opposite of free trade. Free trade is free trade. You can't be both. They're opposites of each other. What?
The GOP that did embrace those values, like the era of Eisenhower or something, has been pissed away in favor of corporate cronyism. Now, corporate cronyism, a lot of people conflate that with capitalism and say, well, we're in end-stage capitalism, it's oligarchy. No, it's not end-stage capitalism. The vertical monopolies creating that system inevitably require a strong state to exist.
Okay. So these are end results of capitalism, and you're saying we need strong regulations to keep that in check. It's not a very right-leaning position of you, Styx. Don't you also claim to be pretty libertarian? Seems like the free market should have sorted this out by now if it was gonna.
In the absence of a strong state, they cannot form. When we see Silicon Valley, which is, basically worse than the Gilded Age could ever be, and it's only one proportion of the economy that we're talking about, just human communication in the technological sense, those monopolies are insured by the government that is being paid off by the monopolies.
Oh, he's saying that strong government is the reason we have monopolistic companies and uncompetitive business practices. No. You need regulations, you need strong ones, you need to break up large companies. That's not right-wing, though. Advocate for left-wing policies, and stop being a fascist then if that's your end goal.
One hand washes the other. The situation gets worse and worse, and they form trusts. They're already illegal. They're facing antitrust legislation for a reason. A patriot party that represents the average person does not delve into deep id pol, except for American identitarianism and in the sense of the civic structure, I think is a good idea. And I realize that it's absorbed a lot of ethno-nat tendencies. It's also absorbed some libertarian tendencies, though. It's also absorbed some libertarian tendencies, though. I realize that it's and in the sense of the civic structure, I think is a good idea. And I realize that it's absorbed a lot of ethno-nat tendencies.
It absorbed a little bit of ethno-nationalist tendencies, but whatever. No. If something absorbed ethno-nationalistic tendencies, then you burn that shit to the ground. What? That's not a little thing that you're just like, we got some tendencies from, Nazis, but whatever. We'll deal with that. Seems like that's the headline, but okay.
Also absorbs some libertarian tendencies, though. I'm failing to see...
Libertarianism and ethno-nationalism are directly competing. You cannot say, I'm libertarian, but also, if you're a certain skin color, get the fuck out of my state. That's not how it works. That's not libertarian.
See how that, imperfect as though it is, there's no perfect political system other than me being the dictator of the world, and by the way, everyone agrees with that in secret, but, you know, they don't like to talk about how they wish that they could rule the world, but everyone basically thinks that they should.
No, that's a terrible, terrible idea. Like, I think I'm right on the things I believe, because everyone thinks they're correct, otherwise they wouldn't believe the things they believe. But I also recognize that as an individual person, my beliefs and my understanding of the world are not the end-all be-all, which is why you don't have dictators. Even a very smart person out there somewhere, which I am not, would not make a good dictator. Dictatorships are never good for anyone, including the dictators. So no. No. Just because you're projecting your want to be a dictator onto other people does not make it so, Styx.
Some people would do a better job than others. I think most of the politicians would do the worst job. When I compare that to what neoliberalism has given us, not just in the US, but anywhere in the world, it's a clear-cut difference. It's night and day. Neoliberalism has given us proxy wars and pissed away all of our capital, ruined our currency.
Oh, God. None of this is the fault of conservatism or neocons, by the way. It's all neoliberalism. And I'm not a fan of neoliberalism either. But to place all of America's problems squarely at the feet of neolibs and not at all on conservative policies that sprung out of, like, the Reagan era? No, not an accurate appraisal of the situation.
It fails at diplomacy repeatedly, alienates ally and hostile state alike, and then causes all sorts of struggles and pogroms, is censorious, has lost basically all regard for the Constitution, has basically lost all regard for the very concept of Americanism. It wants to fundamentally transform away from the United States government is meant to represent the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people. Essentially, they want to score that out of existence in favor of our government is just one of many. They form basically an oligarchic globalistic council, and they work with corporations directly, and everyone else, basically, you're expected to just follow whatever they fucking say. The problem is that in such a globalized structure, the U.S., if it sees itself as just a co-equal state of states, instead of exceptional, instead of worthy of its own total sovereignty, if it takes like a UK pre-Brexit approach, because it is only one nation with one vote at the table, it can't possibly hope to maintain the traditional constitutional structure that made all of the wealth that we have.
Why? That's a stupid thing to think. You can be one nation in a plurality of nations in the world and have some sort of, like, regional or someday future government, something like UN, but maybe, you know, the UN with actual power. Whereas the UN now basically has absolutely no power outside of just, you know, bringing people to the table to discuss things in non-binding ways. It has nothing to do with whether or not your nation in and of itself is still sovereign, right? Any more than, like, I live in Michigan in the United States. Michigan is a sovereign state, but it also exists in a federation of other states, the federal government, right? You can have sovereignty for your own state while also abiding by rules agreed upon by other people that are, or other entities, rather, governments, whatever, that are in some sort of confederation altogether, right? Whatever name you want to give to some, like, united group of governments that work together towards goals, like the EU or whatever, right? The EU is a thing, but that doesn't mean Germany isn't sovereign. It's just a party to other agreements with other states.
The United States became exceptional in terms of becoming the world superpower, the trade power, the economic power, the main diplomatic muscle of the West. All of that happened because of liberty.
Styx, there was this little thing, okay? It was called World War II. So, the industrialized nations of the world in Europe, where World War II mostly happened. I understand there was stuff between Japan and China and stuff happening in Asia too. That's not what I'm talking about right now, because when we're talking about the dominance and how the United States came to power as one of the world's superpowers during the Cold War era, and then the world superpower in a post-Cold War world, you gotta talk about sort of the West as an entity, whatever the fuck that means, okay? We're talking about industrialized developed countries, which China and stuff wouldn't become until later. Anyway, so post-World War II, developed industrialized nations all across Europe were screwed. Their infrastructure had been bombed like crazy. They had lost a ton of manpower in terms of like potential workers and people who, you know, function society, the actual workers, because they'd lost them in the war. So their economies, their infrastructure were just effed for like generations, okay? Meanwhile, you have the United States across the ocean, an industrialized nation that didn't get into the war until quite a bit later, with ample workers to spare, right? This led to great prosperity for the United States over the coming decades, as the rest of the world ended up depending on the United States for tons of its manufactured goods and designing new things, all sorts of stuff. This sort of brought the United States, and on top of that we had pretty strong unions at the time and pretty pro-labor policies, and this helped the United States flourish and become again a dominant superpower in the world, alongside the Soviet Union until like 89 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Then we start to get sort of in the 1980s Reagan policies that start undoing a lot of these strong labor protections, unionization. We end up outsourcing labor and stuff because capitalists want to find cheaper labor elsewhere in the world. The rest of the world also started to rebuild their infrastructure and kind of come back to a place where manufacturing could exist elsewhere at a cheaper rate. And we wind up with the world we live in today, right? Saying that the United States became a world superpower because liberty, it's a nice Hallmark card, but you get a 0 on your history report. That's not how shit works. Liberty! No, it's not. No, it's not. There's a variety of socioeconomic, historical factors that went into America's dominance coming into the 21st century. And saying liberty just makes me think you're an idiot.
All of that happened because for the first 200 years almost of our existence, by and large, you could unbridle people's own creative talent. They were not burdened by massive taxes and huge regulations and a bunch of moralism and social...
Taxes were really high in like the 1950s and 60s. That stuff started coming down in the 80s because of people like because of people like Ronald Reagan and the idea of trickle-down economics. Before then, people realized, oh, once you're wealthy or once companies are wealthy, they should be able to pay their fair share of taxes so we can, you know, make sure we have social programs and can build the highway system and all sorts of stuff. And then Reagan comes along and they're like, oh, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And all of a sudden, tax rates plummet, both corporate and personal, and the United States starts to go to absolute shit in terms of infrastructure, in terms of education. You cannot just lie and say tax rates were low when the United States began growing at its highest rate in its history. That is an abject lie. What are you doing, Styx?
Sense, yes, but by and large it was a free society. So the inventor that's born in the French Empire might have to get leave from the king and the local lord and a bunch of bureaucrats to have a little laboratory to advance medicine and develop, you know, chemotherapy or something. The U.S. scientists didn't have that problem. A private investor might say, well, that seems like an eccentric but cool idea. Yeah, here's $100, because that would have been a lot, you know, back in the day. And then potentially medicine is vastly improved. The United States, by and large, unbridled things. And another part of it, and this is another thing that we have to understand, The United States is not the same as it was Homestead Act era. Back then, the other part that allowed it to grow massively, become much more powerful, is that you were able to use new technology, architecture, engineering, and everything to design most of the country because only a small proportion of it was really settled. And that's not the way that it is in the old world. It just isn't. Africa is gaining massive economic potential for the same reason, because most of its boom, most of its development has occurred in the last 50, 60 years. Things are improving. It comes with some growing pains, like, oh, higher population density but no significant native medical infrastructure spawns pandemics. It could be a problem. This happened in the United States too. People don't even fucking realize it. There was a time before 50s era sanitation. Things were a little bit dicey for the average person in the U.S. You remember polio? Good thing that that's basically been wiped out in the world. But a
Thanks, vaccines.
Patriot Party that represents workers' rights, not in the socialistic sense, but in the sense of, hey, the workers benefit if government gets out of their fucking way most of the time. Doesn't throw Americans under the bus to pay other countries just to tolerate us, but instead focuses on having diplomacy that stabilizes our allies and keeps them from needing a bunch of handouts. A national motto of our supremacy, insofar as the United States goes. The way that you practice that, the way that you have a true patriotic, strong civic society, is you look at yourself as superior, but you don't entangle yourself with others whenever possible.
Why do you need to look at yourself as superior to run a country? Why can't you just accept, like, hey, we're a country, we like the way we do things, or there are certain things that we need to work on, here are the things that we need to work on as a country, but we're also one nation, a plurality of nations. There are hundreds of countries in the world. We are not the only one. We're not even the most populated one or anything. Why do we all of a sudden get to think we get to make decisions for other people?
So you think, well, we have the greatest military, but use it sparingly. We have the greatest economy. Fair trade, free trade in the general sense. Don't take abuse from other countries. Smack them down if they try, and you can do that economically. You don't need to invade them. By and large, in every other conceptualization, free trade. That's expecting more of your government. Right now, most of the government is sleazeballs, and there's a bunch of lawyers and hack business people that repeatedly lie to people.
People shit on lawyers a lot, and I understand why. There are a lot of people in the profession who are scummy, and people hate prosecutors, for good reasons a lot of the time, but shitting on all lawyers is pretty stupid, considering, again, there are tons of really great defense attorneys, people who go and they become public defenders, or they do pro bono work for people who can't afford it. Like, lawyers are a necessary part of society when you have so many laws, right? The law is complicated, just like the human body is complicated, and just because there might be some scummy doctors out there doesn't mean you don't need doctors, right? Same thing with lawyers, right? You need lawyers. You just do.
They do all sorts of crazy shit, and as a society we've become pathetic. We don't care anymore. A lot of people have either become demoralized or apolitical to the point where they don't even care if there's corruption. And not just a little corruption. It's not like, well, this dude got caught embezzling $1,000. Okay, well, make him pay restitution or something. No, we're talking people are embezzling fucking millions of dollars. They're starting wars on credit. They're doing crazy things that are ruining the underpinnings.
Like George W. Bush? A Republican? Like George H.W. Bush? A Republican?
Of not just the U.S., but Western civilization. And part of this is a struggle for something more than the United States. Because the United States is more than just a country. The United States...
Like Obama? Bombing the shit out of people? Neolib? Like Trump? Bombing the shit out of people? Republican?
States is also an encapsulation of an idea that has spawned, in many ways, modern Western civilization, strengthened it, and held the bulwark against authoritarian communism and all sorts of other terrible ideologies from the old world. It's managed to hold that together as the hegemon for the last century. We're getting in hard times where we may no longer be able to guarantee that. Where we might have an international struggle to see, is the world going to go into a global community in which countries govern themselves, they look after their own people, they free trade, that war is limited because people are trying to get along? Or are we going to have international globalism, and we're going to have a one world order situation where 99% of the world are serfs? Yeah, it's great to be a 1%er, and if you're a 10%er, you know, you can have a few toys. Other than that, you fucked.
You're describing basically a dystopian capitalist cyberpunk future. Your beef is with capitalism, Styx.
You become a serf. Half of you will be replaced by robots, probably. I think that the United States is worth fighting for. The demoralization and blackpilling shit really needs to end, and a lot of it's coming from shills anyway. Or bots. Some of it probably is Chinese bots at this point. Of course, and Russian. They would like the U.S. to collapse as hegemon so they'd have more power. And it's not like the Cold War technically ended, it's just the USSR ended. I'm not even going to get into the Russia bullshit. Now, most of it, I'm sure, is not related to them. I think there are plenty of homegrown shills that really want to burn society to the ground. Guess what? They don't want to burn it to the ground because they want to build something better for you. They want to burn it to the ground so they can build something more productive, more lucrative for them. They want a bigger slice of the pie, and so they want to make other people miserable and lead them to their own demise. Just like wolves leading goddamn sheep. All these shit-ass little people with their black bloc and BLM signs and stuff, they're basically the same as espionage agents. They're just...
Not wanting people of color to be shot by the police is the same as being a foreign spy. Not sure how you got there, but okay.
Working for a different power. They're working solely for themselves instead of for a national collective on foreign shores. It's the only real difference. That's about all.
Does Styx just decide to bail out of the video seconds after he says the craziest shit? Is that how he decides when the video is over? Oh, I've escalated to a point where what I'm saying doesn't even make sense anymore. That's about all. Brilliant.